She was meant to be a doll in an executioner's hands, but became breath for a ghost. In the darkness of the manor, where hatred is the only warmth, Bellatrix's most dangerous lesson wasn't about pain. The rain lashed against the high arched windows of Malfoy Manor, a relentless, drowning rhythm that had become the heartbeat of the house. Inside, the air was not merely cold, it was dead. It carried the stale scent of ancient dust, burning wax, and the metallic tang of dark magic that clung to the tapestries like cigarette smoke. Hermione Granger stood in the center of the drawing room, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The marble floor was freezing beneath her bare feet, sending phantom aches up her shins, but she didn't dare shift her weight. To move was to draw attention, and attention in this house was a curse. Again, the voice whispered. It wasn't a shout. It was worse. It was a caress, sharp and cloying, like a razor blade wrapped in silk. Bellatrix Lestrange circled her. The older witch moved with a predatory grace, her black robes trailing behind her like ink spilling through water. She didn't look insane today. That was the terrifying part. Today, she looked lucid, sharp, a professor examining a disappointing student. I said, again, Bellatrix repeated, stopping directly in front of Hermione. She reached out, a long, pale finger tracing the line of Hermione's jaw, forcing her chin up. You are holding back, little mudblood. The magic knows. It can taste your hesitation. Hermione's hand trembled. In her grip, a wand. Not her own, but a piece of hawthorn she'd been forced to claim from the pile of the snatched, felt heavy, resistant. It buzzed with a low, angry heat. I can't, Hermione whispered, the words scraping her dry throat. You can. You will. Bellatrix's eyes shone with a feverish light. You have the anger in you. I've seen it. I've carved it out of you myself. Use it. Do you think Potter won the war by asking nicely? Do you think the Dark Lord rose to power by hesitating? She leaned in, her breath smelling of peppermint and rot. Power is not about morality, girl. Power is about intent. She pointed to the cage on the table. Inside, a large raven sat motionless, its beady eyes fixed on Hermione. Kill it, Bellatrix commanded softly. Cleanly, without an incantation. Use your will. Hermione stared at the bird. It was innocent. It was alive. Every fibre of her being, every year of Hogwarts education, every memory of the warm common room and Ron's laughter screamed at her to drop the wand, to refuse. But the memory of the last refusal was etched into the nerves of her left arm, a phantom fire that never truly went away. She closed her eyes. She didn't want to kill, but she wanted to survive. And survival, she was learning, was a series of small murders. You killed your pride first, then your hope, then your mercy. She focused not on the bird, but on the coldness in the room. She gathered the despair that had been pooling in her chest for months, the icy, suffocating weight of the manor, and she pushed it down her arm. Die, she thought, not with hate, but with a desperate need for this to be over. A flash of green light, sickly and silent, erupted from the hawthorn tip. The bird simply toppled over. No pain, just an ending. Hermione dropped the wand as if it were burning coal. The sound of it clattering against the marble echoed like a gunshot in the silence. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the shaking that started in her fingertips and rattled her very teeth. Sloppy, Bellatrix murmured, though there was a dark satisfaction curling the corner of her mouth. but effective. You are learning, pet. The mud in your veins is dirty, but it is thick. Hermione didn't answer. She stared at the dead bird, feeling a hollow pit open up in her stomach. She was losing pieces of herself. Every spell chipped away at Hermione Granger, leaving behind something harder, sharper, and unrecognizable. From the shadows of the doorway, a figure watched. Draco Malfoy stood as still as the statues lining the hall. He was a spectre in his own home, clad in black that swallowed the dim light. His face was gaunt, the sharp angles of his cheekbones casting deep shadows, and his eyes were pools of grey mercury, stormy, unreadable, and exhausted. He had been watching for an hour. He knew he shouldn't. If his aunt knew he was there, she would drag him into the circle, force him to participate, to applaud. But he couldn't look away. He watched Granger. She looked smaller than he remembered, thinner. Her hair, once a bushy halo of defiance, was matted and tied back severely. She wore a simple grey dress that hung loosely on her frame, stripping her of the Gryffindor colours, stripping her of identity. But it was her eyes that haunted him. They weren't teary. They were dry, burning with a terrifying cold resolve. He had watched her cast the killing curse. He had felt the ripple of dark magic wash over the room, tasting of ozone and despair. And God help him, he had felt a flicker of admiration. She shouldn't be able to do that. She should have broken weeks ago. Most prisoners in the manor lasted days before they were screaming for death or babbling nonsense. But Granger was adapting. Bellatrix wasn't just torturing her, she was forging her. And Granger, with that insufferable, brilliant mind of hers, was letting it happen because she knew it was the only equation that equaled survival. Draco felt a wave of nausea. He gripped the doorframe, his knuckles turning white. He hated this. He hated the smell of the house. He hated the screams that drifted up from the cellar at night. But mostly, he hated the mirror she held up to him. She was the prisoner, yet she was fighting. He was the master, the heir, yet he was paralyzed. He was a coward rotting in a silk-lined cage, while she was turning into steel in the fire. Draco. Bellatrix's voice snapped across the room, cutting through his thoughts. She didn't turn around. She knew he was there. The Lestranges had senses like vipers. Come in. Don't lurk like a house elf. Draco stiffened. He composed his face into the mask of bored indifference he had perfected since 6th year. He stepped into the light, the movement fluid but heavy. I was merely passing, Aunt Bella, he drawled, his voice sounding rusty to his own ears. I didn't wish to interrupt your pedagogy. Bellatrix laughed, a barking, jagged sound. Interrupt? No. Come, look at her. Look at what I've made. She grabbed Hermione by the shoulder, her nails digging into the thin fabric of the dress. Hermione flinched, a microscopic movement, but she didn't pull away. She kept her eyes on the floor, refusing to look at Draco. Draco stepped closer, the smell of rain and dark magic filling his nose. He looked at Hermione, really looked at her. Up close, the damage was visible. The dark circles under her eyes were like bruises. There was a fine tremor in her hands that she was trying to hide by clenching her fists. She smelled of fear, a sour, metallic scent. But beneath it, there was something else. Parchment, soap, and something uniquely her. She cast a silent Avada, Bellatrix boasted, shaking Hermione slightly. The mudblood has teeth. It was a bird, Draco said flatly, his eyes fixed on Hermione's hairline. Hardly a duel. Hermione's head snapped up, her eyes locked with his. For a second, the occlumency walls she had built slipped. Draco expected to see hatred. He expected to see a plea for help. Instead, he saw shame. Deep, burning, corrosive shame. And behind the shame, a challenge. "Don't you dare pity me," her eyes said. "I am doing what I must. Are you?" The connection was electric, a sudden, violent jolt of intimacy in the freezing room. For a heartbeat, they weren't Death Eater and prisoner. They were just two children who had grown up too fast, standing over a dead bird in a house of horrors. "It is a start," Bellatrix purred, unaware of the silent conversation passing between them. She released Hermione with a shove that sent her stumbling back. "Go to your cell, girl. Meditate on the feeling, the power. I want you to dream of it." Hermione regained her balance. She didn't look at Draco again. She nodded once, stiffly, a mockery of a bow, and turned to leave. As she passed him, the air between them seemed to compress. Draco could hear the shallow intake of her breath. He had an insane, suicidal urge to reach out and grab her arm, to ask her if she was all right, to apologize, to tell her that he hadn't slept in weeks either. But he did nothing. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his face a mask of cold porcelain. "Watch your step, Granger," he murmured as she passed, the words slipping out before he could stop them. They were quiet, ambiguous. They could have been a threat. Hermione paused. She didn't turn, but her shoulders tensed. "I know the way, Malfoy," she whispered. Her voice was cracked, unused, but the steel was there. "I know exactly where I am going." She walked out into the corridor, her bare feet silent on the stone. Draco watched her go, the ghost of her scent lingering in the air. He felt a sudden, sharp crack in his chest, as if a rib had snapped. "She is strong," Bellatrix mused, turning her attention to the dead bird, stroking its feathers with a loving touch. "She will make a fine pet, or a terrible weapon." She looked up at Draco, her dark eyes narrowing. "You look pale, Draco. Do you find my methods distasteful?" "I find them messy," Draco lied, gesturing to the bird. "The house reeks of death, Bella. It's tedious." "Tedious," Bellatrix repeated, testing the word. She smiled, and it was a smile of nightmares. "Perhaps you need entertainment then. Perhaps you need a project of your own." Draco felt a chill slide down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "I have duties enough." "Nonsense," she waved a hand dismissively. "You are brooding. It makes you look weak. The Dark Lord does not need weak servants. He needs men of appetite." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the empty doorway where Hermione had vanished. A cruel, calculating light entered her eyes. "Yes," she whispered to herself. "A test. For both of you." Draco didn't ask what she meant. He didn't want to know. He turned on his heel. "I'm going to my chaos. Do not disturb me." He walked away, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty hall. But as he climbed the stairs to the upper wing, he couldn't shake the image of Hermione's eyes. The shame, the fire, the terrifying acceptance. He reached his room and slammed the door, leaning his back against the heavy wood. He slid down until he hit the floor, burying his face in his hands. The silence of the manor pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating. He was drowning, and for the first time in a long time, he realized he wasn't the only one underwater. She was there too, swimming in the dark, kicking against the current with everything she had. He hated her for it. He hated her for being stronger than him. And he hated himself because, for the briefest of moments in the drawing room, looking at the monster his aunt was creating, he hadn't wanted to destroy her. He had wanted to know her. The cellar was not silent. It never was. Even when the screaming stopped, the stone walls seemed to hum with the echoes of past agonies, a low-frequency vibration that rattled in Hermione's teeth. She sat on the edge of the narrow cot, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring into the oppressive dark. Her hands were still shaking. She held them up before her eyes, though she could barely see them in the gloom. They felt foreign, heavy. These were the hands that had held quills, turned pages of Hogwarts, a history, and brewed healing potions. Now they were the hands that had extinguished a life, a bird. It didn't matter that it was just a bird. It was the ease of it that terrified her, the way the magic had slipped from her core like oil, slick and willing. "The mud is thick," Bellatrix had said. Hermione squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the nausea that rolled in waves through her stomach. She was cracking. She could feel the hairline fractures spreading across her mind, spider webbing through her memories. If she broke, if she let the darkness in, there would be nothing left of Hermione Granger. There would only be the vessel Bellatrix was carving. The heavy iron door groaned, the sound of metal grinding on rusted hinges shattering her spiraling thoughts. Light, harsh, yellow, intrusive, spilled into the cell, blinding her. Hermione scrambled back against the damp wall, her breath hitching. It was too late for a lesson. It was the middle of the night. Bellatrix stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the torchlight of the corridor. She wasn't wearing her usual combat robes. She wore heavy velvet, midnight blue, and her hair was tamed into a semblance of elegance. She looked like a nightmare dressed for a gala. "Up!" Bellatrix commanded, her voice devoid of the earlier manic energy. It was cold, functional. Hermione moved slowly, her limbs stiff from the cold. She didn't ask questions. Questions earned pain. She stood, smoothing the filth-stained grey dress she had been wearing for weeks. "You look like a corpse," Bellatrix observed, her lip curling in distaste. She flicked her wand. A sensation like icy water washed over Hermione. The grime on her skin vanished. Her hair untangled itself with a painful yank, and the grey rags morphed. The fabric shimmered, tightening at the waist, loosening at the hem. It was still grey. She was still a prisoner, but the material was finer, softer. It was a dress meant for a house guest, not an inmate. "Better," Bellatrix murmured, stepping closer. The smell of her perfume, heavy floral masking something rotten, filled the small cell. She reached out and grabbed Hermione's chin, forcing her to look up. "The Dark Lord is resting. The manor is quiet. But the boys get restless." Hermione's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I don't understand." "My nephew," Bellatrix whispered, her eyes gleaming with a twisted amusement. "He sits in his room, drinking away his inheritance, staring at the rain. He is sullen. He needs diversion." Ice flooded Hermione's veins. She knew what this was. She had heard the stories. She knew what happened to prisoners when the Death Eaters were bored and drunk. "No," she breathed, the words slipping out before she could stop it. Bellatrix's grip on her jaw tightened, her nails digging in until they broke the skin. "You do not say no to me. You are my creation. I am sending you to him. You will entertain him. You will listen to him. If he wants to talk, you talk. If he wants to scream, you bleed. If he wants to break something, you make sure it is you and not the furniture." She shoved Hermione toward the door. "Go. The West Wing. Third door on the left. Don't make me drag you." Hermione stumbled into the hallway. Her legs felt like lead. Every step was a battle against the instinct to run, to fight, to die rather than submit to this. But she had no wand. She had no allies. She had only the cold, hard calculation of survival. "I will not break," she repeated internally, a mantra syncing with her heartbeat. "I am a stone. I am a wall. I am not here." The walk to the West Wing was a blur of shadows and tapestries that seemed to watch her with stitched eyes. The manor was vast, a labyrinth of cruelty. The air grew colder as she ascended the stairs, moving away from the damp dungeons into the draughty opulence of the living quarters. She reached the door. It was heavy oak, dark and imposing. The brass handle gleamed in the dim light of the sconces. Hermione stood there for a long minute, her hand hovering over the latch. She thought of Draco Malfoy, the boy she had punched in third year, the boy who had called her a mudblood 1,000 times, the boy who had watched her torture earlier that day with eyes that looked like shattered glass. She took a deep breath, pushing the terror down into the dark box in her mind where she kept her screams. She turned the handle. The door opened silently. The room was large, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in emerald and silver. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls lined with bookshelves. It smelled of cedar, old paper, and the sharp bite of fire whiskey. Draco was there. He was sitting in a high-backed leather armchair by the fire, his back to the door. He was in his shirt sleeves, the black fabric unbuttoned at the collar, his forearms resting on his knees. A crystal tumbler dangled loosely from his fingers. He didn't turn around. "I told the elf to leave the bottle," he said, his voice rough, slurring slightly. "Get out." Hermione stood frozen in the doorway. The warmth of the room felt violent after the chill of the cellar. It made her skin prickle. "It's not the elf," she said. Her voice was quiet, hoarse from disuse, but clear. Draco froze. The glass in his hand went perfectly still. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with sudden tension. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he turned his head. When his eyes landed on her, he didn't look angry. He looked struck. He looked at her as if she were a ghost that had just walked through his wards. His gaze travelled from her face, down the altered grey dress, to her bare feet on his expensive rug, and back up to her eyes. He stood up. The movement was uncoordinated, a little too fast. He swayed slightly, catching himself on the arm of the chair. "Granger," he said. The name wasn't a sneer. It was a question, a disbelief. "Your aunt sent me," Hermione said, her chin lifting slightly. She wrapped her arms around herself, not for warmth, but to hold herself together. "She said you required entertainment." Draco's face went pale, a sickly contrast to the flush of alcohol on his cheeks. He stared at her, processing the words, and then the realization hit him. His expression twisted, not into lust, but into a visceral, profound disgust. "Get out!" he snarled. He took a step back, as if she were contagious. "I can't," Hermione replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "She'll kill me if I return, or worse." Draco stared at her, his chest heaving. He looked trapped. He looked at the door, then at her, then at the bottle on the table. He ran a hand through his platinum hair, messing it up, destroying the perfect facade he usually wore. "This is sick," he muttered, turning away from her to look into the fire. "Even for her, this is filth." "I am aware of what I am to you," Hermione said, her voice cutting through the crackle of the fire. "You don't have to remind me." Draco spun around, his eyes flashing. "To me? Do you think this is about you being a mudblood?" The word fell from his lips, but it lacked the usual venom. It sounded tired, hollow. "She sent you here like a present, like a slice of cake. She thinks I'm like them. She thinks I want this." He hurled his glass into the fireplace. It shattered with a violent crash, the remaining amber liquid hissing as it hit the flames. Hermione didn't flinch. She had seen worse things than broken glass today. She watched him, analyzing him. He wasn't acting like a master. He was acting like a prisoner who had just discovered the walls of his cell were closing in. "I don't know what you want, Malfoy," she said softly. "I don't know who you are anymore. I just know I am not allowed to leave." Draco looked at her, his breathing ragged. He seemed to be warring with himself, a silent battle raging behind his storm-grey eyes. He looked at the door, then back at her. "Lock it," he said abruptly. Hermione blinked. "What?" "The door," he snapped, frustration bleeding into his tone. "Lock it. Ward it. Colloportus. Whatever." Hermione stared at him. "I don't have a wand." Draco swore under his breath. He pulled his own wand, Hawthorn, 10 inches from his pocket. For a second, Hermione flinched, her muscles coiled to dodge a curse. Draco saw the movement. He paused, his expression unreadable, guilt flickering in the depths of his gaze. He didn't point the wand at her. He pointed it at the door. "Colloportus," he muttered. A heavy thud echoed as the magical locks engaged. "Muffliato." The room went strangely quiet, the ambient noise of the storm outside dampening to a distant hum. They were sealed in. Draco lowered his wand, but didn't put it away. He looked at her, really looked at her, stripped of the audience of Death Eaters and family. He saw the way she held herself, rigid, terrified, but unbroken. He saw the intelligence that still burned in her eyes, sharp and assessing. "She wants you to entertain me," Draco said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He walked over to the side table and poured himself another drink, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't offer her one. "She wants me to break you, to use you." He took a long swallow, his throat bobbing. He turned to face her, leaning back against the heavy oak table. "So," he said, his face settling into a mask of cruel indifference, though his eyes remained frantically alive. "Entertain me, Granger. Tell me how the Golden Boy is going to save you now." It was a taunt, a familiar rhythm they could both fall into. It was safer than the silence. Hermione felt a spark of anger ignite in her chest. It was a relief. Anger was better than fear. Anger was warm. "He is fighting," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He is doing what you are too afraid to do. He is living for something other than fear." Draco laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a dry, brittle sound. "Fear? You think I'm afraid?" "I think you are terrified," Hermione said, stepping further into the room. She was walking on a knife's edge, but she couldn't stop. "I think you look at that mark on your arm and you want to cut it off. I think you hate this house more than I do." Draco's face hardened. He pushed off the table and stalked toward her. He stopped inches away, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive alcohol and despair. He was taller than her, looming, using his height as a weapon. "You know nothing about me," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You are a guest in my hell, Granger. Don't mistake my hesitation for mercy. I could end you. I could call her back." "Then do it," Hermione challenged, looking up into his eyes. She was trembling, every nerve ending screaming at her to run, but she stood her ground. "Call her. Tell her you can't handle the mudblood. Tell her you're weak." They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with kinetic energy. It was a standoff. Gryffindor fire against Slytherin ice. Draco's jaw worked. He glared at her, searching for the fear, searching for the submission. But he found only a mirror of his own desperation. "You're an idiot," he whispered finally, the venom draining away, leaving only exhaustion. "A reckless Gryffindor idiot." He turned his back on her again, walking to the window to stare out at the rain-lashed grounds. "Take the chair," he said, gesturing vaguely to the one he had vacated. "Don't sit on the floor. You're not a dog." Hermione hesitated. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her knees weak. She looked at the leather armchair, then at Draco's rigid back. "And you?" she asked. "I will stand," Draco said, his voice reflecting off the cold glass of the window. "I need to make sure you don't steal the silverware." It was a weak insult, a deflection. Hermione moved to the chair and sat. The leather was still warm from his body. It was an intimate, unsettling sensation. She curled her legs under her, watching him. They were locked in. The storm raged outside, and the war raged beyond the gates. But in here, in the dim light of the fire, the lines were beginning to blur. He hadn't hurt her. He hadn't touched her. He had locked the door to keep the world out, not to keep her in. Draco took another sip of his drink, his reflection in the window watching her. A grey ghost in a grey dress, sitting in his chair like she belonged there. He hated it. He hated that she was the only real thing in this house. "Don't speak," he ordered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just sit there and exist." Hermione nodded slowly, though he couldn't see her. She watched the firelight play on his platinum hair. She didn't speak. She just breathed in and out, listening to the silence that was slowly, terrifyingly, turning into a truce. The silence in the room was heavier than the iron door that sealed them in. It wasn't the empty, hollow silence of the dungeons, where the only thing waiting in the dark was your own decaying mind. This was a living, breathing silence. It was the sound of two people trying to exist in a space that was too small for the ghosts they carried. Hermione sat in the leather armchair, her body rigid. The warmth of the fire was seeping into her frozen bones, but it brought no comfort. Instead, it brought the stinging return of sensation. Her fingertips throbbed where the hawthorn wand had resisted her. Her arm, the one Bellatrix had marked weeks ago, burned with a phantom itch that she refused to scratch. She watched Draco. He had moved from the window. He was pacing now, a slow, restless prowl along the length of the Persian rug. He didn't look at her. He seemed intent on wearing a path through the expensive wool, his eyes fixed on the floor, his jaws set in a line of white tension. Every time he passed the fire, his shadow stretched long and distorted over her, a dark phantom that made her muscles coil, ready to spring. But he never stopped. He never turned toward her. He was a caged animal, but for the moment he seemed to have forgotten he wasn't the only one in the cage. "You're shaking," he said abruptly. He hadn't stopped pacing, nor had he looked up. The observation was thrown into the air like a stone into a pond. Hermione pressed her hands deeper into the folds of the grey dress, clamping them between her knees. "I'm cold. The room is heated. It's 80 degrees. Then I'm terrified," she snapped, the words slipping out before she could temper them. "Is that better? Does that satisfy the requirement for entertainment?" Draco stopped. He was standing by the heavy oak desk, his hand hovering over the crystal decanter. He slowly turned his head to look at her. His eyes were glassy, the pupils blown wide, swallowing the grey irises. The alcohol was working, stripping away the sharp edges of his occlumency, leaving him looking raw and dangerously human. "Satisfy?" he repeated, the word rolling around his mouth like a curse. "You think I derive pleasure from this? From watching you fall apart in my furniture? Your aunt seems to think so." "My aunt," Draco spat, gripping the neck of the decanter until his knuckles turned the colour of bone, "is insane. She eats madness for breakfast and expects us all to have the stomach for it." He poured a splash of amber liquid into a fresh glass. He stared at it for a moment, the firelight catching in the crystal, turning the liquid to molten gold. Then, with a movement that was almost too fast to track, he walked over to her. Hermione flinched. She couldn't help it. She pressed herself back into the leather, her eyes widening. Draco paused, the glass extended halfway toward her. He saw the flinch. He saw the way her breath hitched and held. His face twisted, a flicker of pain that was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a sneer of defensive arrogance. "Take it," he ordered. "It's fire whiskey. Ogden's, not poison." Hermione looked at the glass, then up at his face. "Why?" "Because the sound of your teeth chattering is annoying me," he lied. The lie was thin, transparent. "And because if you pass out from shock, I'll have to drag you out, and I don't want to touch you." Repulsion. He was using it as a shield. Hermione reached out. Her hand trembled violently, the tremors radiating from her wrist to her fingertips. As she took the glass, her fingers brushed against his. His skin was ice cold. Hers was burning fever hot. The contact was electric, a shock of reality that cut through the numbness. Draco snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned, retreating a step. Hermione brought the glass to her lips, the smell of peat and smoke filling her nose, masking the scent of the dungeons. She took a sip. It burned. It was a glorious, searing heat that clawed its way down her throat and exploded in her empty stomach. She coughed, gasping, tears pricking her eyes. "Careful, Granger," Draco drawled, leaning back against the mantel of the fireplace, watching her with a detached curiosity. "It's strong. It's meant to drown demons, not tickle them." "I have enough demons to drown," she rasped, taking another, larger sip. The alcohol hit her blood almost instantly, dulling the sharp edge of her panic. Her shoulders dropped an inch. Draco watched her drink. He watched the way her throat worked, the way a flush of colour was slowly returning to her pale cheeks. He felt a sickening lurch in his gut. She shouldn't be here. She should be in the library, or shouting at Weasley, or doing whatever it was she did to be so insufferably good. She shouldn't be sitting in his bedroom, drinking his father's whiskey, wearing a dress that looked like a shroud. "She's teaching you," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Hermione lowered the glass, cradling it in her lap with both hands. She stared into the amber depths. "She calls it an apprenticeship. I saw the bird. I know. You enjoyed it." Hermione's head snapped up. The fire in her eyes flared, hot and defensive. "I did not." "I saw your face." Draco pushed, his voice dropping lower, stepping closer again. He was like a moth drawn to a flame he knew would burn him. "I saw the rush, the magic. It seduces you. That's how it starts. First, it's survival. Then, it's efficiency. Eventually, it's power." "I am nothing like her," Hermione hissed. "I am nothing like you." "Aren't you?" Draco tilted his head. "You're in her house. You're using her wand. You're wearing her clothes. How much of Hermione Granger is left, I wonder? If I cut you, would you bleed Gryffindor red, or is it starting to run black?" "I killed a bird to save myself." Hermione's voice rose, cracking with the strain. "I did what I had to do." "And that," Draco whispered, looming over her now, his shadow swallowing her completely, "is exactly what we tell ourselves. I did what I had to do. It's the Malfoy family motto, didn't you know?" He was close enough now that she could smell him. The expensive soap, the stale alcohol, the underlying scent of rain and ozone. He looked exhausted. There were lines around his mouth that hadn't been there in 6th year. He looked older, worn down, like a statue that had been left out in the acid rain. Hermione looked at him, really looked at him, and the anger drained out of her, leaving a hollow ache. "You're trying to make me hate you," she observed softly. "Why?" Draco blinked. The vulnerability in her voice seemed to catch him off guard. He opened his mouth to retort, to sneer, to hurl another insult, but the words died in his throat. "Because it's easier," he admitted, the truth slipping out in the whisper of the fire. "It's easier if we are enemies. If you are the prisoner and I am the monster, the lines are clear." "The lines are gone, Draco," she said, using his given name for the first time. The sound of it hung in the air, heavy and strange. "We are just two people locked in a room while the world ends outside." Draco stared at her. He looked at the way the firelight caught the stray curls escaping her severe braid. He looked at the smudge of ink, or was it dirt, on her collarbone. He reached out. This time Hermione didn't flinch. She held her breath, her eyes locked on his. His hand hovered near her face. He wasn't reaching to strike her. His fingers, long and pale, drifted toward a lock of hair that had fallen over her eyes. He tucked it behind her ear. The touch was feather-light. It was barely there. But to Hermione, it felt like a brand. His fingertips grazed her temple, cool against her feverish skin. He lingered for a fraction of a second too long, his thumb brushing the hollow of her cheekbone. For that second, the mask fell completely. Draco Malfoy looked at her, not with hatred, not with disgust, but with a terrifying, devastating recognition. He saw her. He saw the girl who had punched him, the girl who raised her hand in class, the girl who was currently holding herself together with sheer will. And he realized, with a jolt of horror, that he didn't want her to break. He pulled his hand back as if he'd touched a live wire. He turned abruptly, walking back to the window, putting the width of the room between them again. "Drink your whiskey, Granger," he said, his voice rough, shaking slightly. "And don't get used to the hospitality. Tomorrow you go back to the cellar, and I go back to..." This. I know, Hermione whispered. She took another sip, the warmth spreading through her chest, warring with the chill that Draco's touch had left behind. She looked at his back. He was rigid, holding himself up against the window frame as if it were the only thing keeping him standing. Malfoy? He didn't turn. What? Thank you. He stiffened. For what? For the drink? Don't be pathetic. No, she said, staring at the fire. For not locking the door from the outside. Draco didn't answer. He couldn't. He stood there, watching the rain batter the glass, feeling the ghost of her skin on his fingertips. He had locked them in together because he couldn't bear to be part of the mechanism that hurt her tonight. He told himself it was defiance against his aunt. He told himself it was just a moment of rebellion. But as he listened to the soft rhythm of Hermione's breathing behind him, he knew it was something much more dangerous. He was lonely, and for the first time in years, the silence in the room wasn't screaming at him. Sleep, he commanded into the glass, his voice low. Take the chair. I won't disturb you. And you? I don't sleep, Draco said. I keep watch. I keep watch over the monsters, he didn't say, to make sure they don't get in, or to make sure I don't become one. Hermione curled her legs up onto the seat of the massive chair. It was big enough to swallow her whole. She rested her head against the wingback, clutching the empty glass like a talisman. She watched him for a long time, her eyelids growing heavy as the adrenaline faded and the alcohol took hold. She saw the tension in his shoulders. She saw the way his hand twitched toward his wand every time the wind howled too loudly. He was a prisoner too. The realization settled in her chest, heavy and sad. He wasn't the jailer. He was just another inmate with a slightly nicer cell. As sleep finally began to drag her under, the last thing she saw was Draco Malfoy's reflection in the dark window, a pale ghost standing guard over his enemy, looking out into the night, as if searching for a dawn that was never going to come. And for the first time since she had been dragged through the gates of Malfoy Manor, Hermione Granger didn't feel entirely alone. The fire had burned down to embers, a bed of pulsing orange eyes staring out from the grate. The room had cooled, the oppressive heat of the earlier evening replaced by the creeping damp of the manor's stone bones. The storm outside had exhausted itself, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like pressure against the eardrums. Draco hadn't moved from the window for hours. His legs ached, a dull throb that grounded him, but he didn't sit. To sit was to surrender. To sit was to admit that he belonged in this room, in this life, in this skin. He turned his head slowly, the movement stiff. Hermione was asleep. It seemed impossible. In the heart of the enemy's stronghold, curled into the chair of the boy who had tormented her for years, she slept. Her breathing was shallow but steady, a soft rhythm that scraped against Draco's raw nerves. She looked smaller now, the tension drained from her frame, leaving behind only the exhaustion. Her head had lolled to the side, exposing the curve of her neck, pale and vulnerable against the dark leather. Draco stared at that exposed patch of skin. A single spell, a single word. That was all it would take to end it, to end her suffering, to end the complication she represented. He took a step toward her. The floorboards, usually treacherous, remained silent under his feet. He was a ghost in his own home, practiced in the art of being unseen. He stopped 3 feet away. The smell of her was stronger here, Beneath the dust and the fear, there was a scent of ozone and old parchment. It was the smell of the library at Hogwarts. It was the smell of a life he had lost. Her hand had slipped from her lap, dangling over the armrest. The sleeve of the grey dress had ridden up, revealing the forearm. Draco flinched. He couldn't help it. The word was there. Mud blood, carved into her flesh with a cursed blade. The scars were raised, angry and red, a permanent brand of his aunt's madness. It wasn't just a word. It was a claim. It marked her as cattle. It marked her as a thing to be used and discarded. Draco looked at his own left arm, hidden beneath the layers of black silk. His mark was different, ink and dark magic, burned into the skin by the Dark Lord himself. But the weight was the same. They were both branded. They were both property. A sudden, violent wave of nausea rolled through him. He hated it. He hated the word on her arm more than he hated the mark on his own, because she didn't deserve it. He was a coward who had made his choices, however coerced. She was just her. Hermione whimpered in her sleep. Her brow furrowed, a spasm of pain crossing her face. Her fingers twitched, grasping at the empty air, searching for a wand she didn't have. "No," she whispered, the sound barely audible. "Please, not him." Draco froze. Who was she dreaming of? Voldemort? Greyback? Him? He felt an intruder's shame. He shouldn't be seeing this. This vulnerability was hers. He had no right to it. And yet he couldn't look away. He felt a strange magnetic pull, a terrifying urge to step into the nightmare and pull her out. The room was getting colder. The draft from the window was biting. Draco turned to the bed, the massive four-poster monstrosity he rarely slept in. A heavy quilt of emerald velvet lay folded at the foot. He grabbed it, the fabric heavy and soft in his hands. He walked back to the chair. He moved with agonizing slowness, terrified that the rustle of fabric would wake her, terrified that she would wake up and see him looming over her like a predator. He leaned down. For a moment, his face was inches from hers. He could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, a stark contrast to the ice in his veins. He held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Gently, with a tenderness that felt alien to his hands, he draped the quilt over her. He tucked it around her shoulders, covering the grey dress, covering the scar on her arm. She sighed. The tension in her face smoothed out. She burrowed slightly into the warmth, her cheek pressing against the velvet. Draco straightened up, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He felt dizzy. This was dangerous. This was treason. If Bellatrix walked in now, if his father saw him, let them come, a treacherous voice whispered in his mind. Let them see. He retreated to the fireplace, sinking down onto the hearthrug. He couldn't sit in the other chair. He couldn't be on her level. He needed to be lower. He needed to be the guard dog at the feet of the weary traveller. He poured the last of the fire whiskey into his glass and drank it neat, staring at the embers. He waited for the dawn. He waited for the inevitable return of the world. The first grey light of morning was not a welcome guest. It didn't bring hope. It brought exposure. It filtered through the heavy curtains, turning the room into a washed-out landscape of shadows and guilt. Hermione woke with a gasp. There was no slow transition from sleep to wakefulness. One moment she was in the void, the next she was awake, her heart pounding, her muscles coiled to fight. She sat up, the heavy quilt sliding down her chest. Her hand flew to her throat. Leather, wood, the smell of cedar. She wasn't in the cell. Memory rushed back like a physical blow. The summons, the room, the whiskey, Draco. She whipped her head around. He was there. He was sitting on the floor by the dead fire, his back against the stone surround, one leg drawn up, his arm resting on his knee. He was still wearing the clothes from the night before, the black shirt now wrinkled, the top buttons undone. His hair was messy, falling into his eyes. He was watching her. His face was pale, stripped of all defenses in the unforgiving morning light. There were dark circles under his eyes that mirrored her own. He looked wrecked. He looked human. "You're awake," he said. His voice was a ruin, gravel and ash. Hermione pulled the quilt tighter around herself, her fingers digging into the velvet. It smelled of him. "I fell asleep," she stammered, the realization horrifying her. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," Draco said, rubbing a hand over his face. "You were unconscious. It's a biological necessity, apparently." "You didn't sleep," she observed. It wasn't a question. "No? Why?" Draco looked at her. His eyes were bleak. "Because if I slept, I might have missed the chance to strangle you while you were defenseless." The threat was there, but it lacked teeth. It was a reflex, a muscle memory of hatred that no longer fit the shape of his mouth. Hermione stared at him. She looked at the blanket she was clutching. She looked at the empty glass by his foot. "You covered me," she said softly. Draco flinched. He looked away, focusing intently on a spot on the rug. "It was cold. If you froze to death in my room, the paperwork would be tedious." "Malfoy, don't." He stood up, the movement jerky. He swayed slightly, then steadied himself against the mantel. "Don't look for kindness, Granger. There isn't any. I didn't want to hear your teeth chattering anymore." He was lying. They both knew he was lying. The air between them was thick with the unspoken truth. "I kept you safe. For one night, I kept the monsters away." Hermione stood up. The quilt fell to the floor, a pool of green velvet. She felt exposed without it, the grey dress suddenly feeling thin and inadequate. Her limbs felt heavy, but her mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. The sleep, real, dreamless sleep, had restored a fraction of her strength. "What happens now?" she asked. Draco turned to the window. He pulled the curtain back a fraction, wincing at the light. "Now," he said, his voice flat, "the house wakes up. My aunt will expect a report. She will want to know if I was entertained." Hermione felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "And what will you tell her?" Draco turned back to her. His expression was unreadable again, the occlumency walls slamming back into place. "I will tell her that you were sufficient, that you broke, that you cried." "I didn't cry," Hermione said, lifting her chin. "I know," Draco said softly, "but she needs to believe you did. If she thinks you are strong, she will break you harder. If she thinks you are already broken, she might get bored. Boredom is your only hope, Granger." He walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the latch, his back to her. "When you go out there," he said, his voice low and hurried, "don't look at me. Don't speak to me. If I insult you, don't fight back. Take it. Do you understand?" "I understand," Hermione whispered. "I have to be him," Draco said, and for a second his voice cracked. "I have to be the Malfoy heir. If I'm not, we're both dead." He muttered the counter-curse. The heavy lock clicked open. The sound was like a gunshot, signaling the end of the truce. Draco opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the oppressive atmosphere of the manor rushed in instantly, displacing the cedar-scented air of the bedroom. "Get out," Draco said loudly, his voice sneering, carrying down the corridor. "And tell the elf to bring me coffee. You're useless, mudblood. Boring." He shoved her, hard enough to make her stumble into the hallway, but his hand lingered for a fraction of a second on her shoulder. A silent apology, or perhaps a plea. Hermione caught her balance. She looked at him one last time. His face was a mask of disdain, his lip curled, his eyes cold. But deep in those grey irises, she saw the terrified boy who had sat on the floor all night watching her sleep. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say goodbye. She channeled every ounce of her Gryffindor acting ability. "I hate you," she spat, her voice trembling with feigned weakness. "Good," Draco sneered and slammed the door in her face. Hermione stood alone in the corridor. The silence of the manor wrapped around her like a shroud. She was back in hell. But as she turned to walk toward the stairs that led down to the dungeons, she realized something had changed. She touched her arm, the spot where he had covered her. She was still a prisoner. He was still a Death Eater. But the equation had shifted. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was keeping a secret. And in a place where knowledge was power, that secret felt like a weapon. She started down the stairs, the stone cold under her feet, but a small, fierce flame burning in her chest. She would endure. She would survive. Because now she knew that the monster in the tower was just as afraid of the dark as she was. And he had given her a blanket. As she descended into the gloom, Hermione Granger began to plan. Not how to die with dignity, but how to wake the boy who was sleeping behind the mask. 3 days passed in the suffocating dark of the cellar. To Hermione, time had become a fluid, treacherous concept, measured only by the arrival of the house elf with a bowl of grey broth and the distant, rhythmic dripping of a leaking pipe. Before that night in the West Wing, the darkness had been a void, a hungry thing that ate her memories and eroded her hope. Now, however, the darkness was different. It was populated. She sat on the damp cot, her legs drawn up, eyes closed. She wasn't sleeping. She was building. In the center of her mind, amidst the ruins of her library and the shattered glass of her composure, she constructed a room. It had high ceilings, the smell of cedar and fire whiskey, and a fire that never went out. She replayed the memory of the quilt settling over her shoulders. The weight of it, the warmth. It was a tangible anchor in a sea of madness. He covered me, she thought, the words a mantra against the cold. He didn't have to. He gained nothing from it. It was a choice. That single act of unnecessary mercy was a crack in the world Bellatrix was trying to build for her. Bellatrix preached that power was absolute, that cruelty was the only currency. But Draco had spent kindness like a man throwing gold into the ocean. The lock on the cell door clicked. The sound was sharp, metallic, bringing the crushing reality of the manor rushing back in. Hermione opened her eyes. She didn't flinch. She stood up, smoothing the grey dress that still felt ghost-warm from the phantom quilt. "Up," the guard grunted. It wasn't Bellatrix. It was Scabia. He leered at her, his gaze raking over her form with a greasy hunger, but he kept his distance. There was a new aura around the girl, a strange, brittle dignity that made the snatchers uneasy. "Madam, Wants you. Ballroom. Hermione walked past him, her head high. She was afraid. Fear was a constant hum in her blood now. But she was no longer paralyzed. She had a secret, and secrets were power. The ballroom was a cavern of ice. The crystal chandeliers were charmed to burn with a cold blue light, casting long skeletal shadows across the polished floor. The windows were black eyes staring out into the night. Bellatrix was waiting in the center of the room. She was vibrating with energy, pacing a tight circle like a caged tiger. And Draco was there. He stood near the far wall, leaning against a pillar of obsidian. He was dressed in his Death Eater robes, the high collar framing a face that was carved from marble. He looked immaculate, lethal, and utterly empty. When Hermione entered, his eyes flickered toward her. Just once. A microscopic movement. There was no recognition in them, no warmth, no memory of the boy who had sat on the floor watching her sleep. The mask was back, and it was seamless. Finally, Bellatrix hissed, spinning around. Her robes flared. You move like a slug, girl. Perhaps I should remove a toe to improve your aerodynamics. I move as fast as I am allowed, Hermione said, her voice steady. Bellatrix's eyes narrowed. She stalked closer, circling Hermione, sniffing the air. You seem composed. Have you been practicing your meditation, or have you simply accepted your place as meat? I am learning, Hermione replied, using the phrase Bellatrix liked. We shall see. Bellatrix turned to Draco. Draco, come here. Draco pushed off the pillar. He walked toward them, his movements fluid and lazy. He looked bored. It was a perfect performance. Hermione knew it was a performance now because she had seen the tremors in his hands when the mask slipped. Yes, Aunt Bella, he drawled, stopping a few feet away. He didn't look at Hermione. He looked through her, as if she were a piece of furniture. You said she was boring, Bellatrix said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You said she broke, that she was useless. She is, Draco said flatly. She cried for hours. It was pathetic. Is that so? Bellatrix smiled, showing too many teeth. Because she doesn't look broken to me, Draco. She looks arrogant. She whipped her wand out. Expelliarmus! A wand flew from the pocket of her robes, not her own, but the hawthorn wand Hermione had used to kill the bird. She caught it and tossed it to Hermione. Hermione caught it by reflex. The wood was warm, humming with a dark, aggressive energy. A test, Bellatrix announced, clapping her hands. For both of you. You say she is weak, Draco. Prove it. Duel her. The air in the room vanished. Draco's mask didn't slip, but Hermione saw the way his throat bobbed. A duel? She barely knows which end of the wand to hold, Bella. It's hardly sport. Then end it quickly, Bellatrix snapped, her face hardening. She needs to learn defense. Pain is the best teacher. Hurt her, Draco. Show me you have the stomach for it. Unless... She stepped closer to him, her voice turning syrupy and dangerous. Unless you are going soft. Unless you enjoyed your little entertainment too much. The accusation hung in the air, sharp as a knife. Draco went still. He knew, and Hermione knew, that this was the trap. Bellatrix suspected. She had smelled the hesitation on him like rot. If he refused, if he held back, she would know. And then she would kill them both. Draco turned to Hermione. He raised his wand. Hawthorn, 10 inches, the same wood as hers. Pick it up, Granger, he said, cold, hard, and devoid of mercy. Don't make this boring. Hermione raised her wand. Her hand was shaking, but she gripped the wood tight. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the tension in his jaw. She saw the panic screaming behind the grey ice of his eyes. He has to do this, she realized. The thought was a splash of cold water. He has to hurt me. If he doesn't, she will destroy him. "Start!" Bellatrix shrieked. "Stupefy!" Hermione yelled, the red light erupting from her wand. Draco deflected it with a lazy flick of his wrist. He didn't counterattack immediately. He stepped forward, closing the distance. "Weak!" he taunted, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "Sloppy! Is that the best the brightest witch of her age can do?" "Expulso!" Hermione fired again, aiming for his chest. He shielded again, the blue light of his protego flaring. He was toying with her. But why? Then she saw it. He was moving her. With every step, every deflection, he was positioning her away from the stone pillar, away from the sharp edges of the furniture. He was herding her toward the open center of the room. "Fight back!" Bellatrix screamed from the sidelines. "Bleed her, Draco! Crucio her!" The command hung in the air. Draco froze for a fraction of a second. Hermione saw his eyes squeeze shut. "Do it," she thought, projecting the thought with all the force of her mind. "Do it, Draco. Don't let her win." Draco opened his eyes. There was no hatred in them, only a desperate, crushing apology. "Diffindo," he cast. It wasn't the Cruciatus. It was a cutting curse. The spell hit Hermione's shoulder. It felt like a whip crack. Pain, hot and sharp, exploded across her skin. The force of the blow knocked her backward. She hit the floor hard, sliding across the polished wood. She gasped, clutching her shoulder. Warm, wet blood seeped through her fingers, staining the grey dress crimson. "Good!" Bellatrix cackled. "Again, the legs!" Draco didn't move. He stood with his wand raised, his chest heaving. He stared at the blood on Hermione's dress. He looked like he was the one bleeding. Hermione scrambled to her knees. The pain was grounding. It was real. "Get up!" Draco snarled, but the volume was for Bellatrix. The intent was for her. "Get up! Don't stay down!" Hermione forced herself up. She raised her wand. She didn't fire a spell at him. Instead, she cast a shield charm. A shimmering wall of air appeared between them. "Smart," Bellatrix mused, "but shields break." Draco attacked again. He was relentless now, raining spells down on her shield. Bombata, Confringo, Reducto. Each impact shook her to her bones. He was overpowering her, battering her defenses, forcing her to focus solely on survival. He was exhausting her. He was making sure she couldn't attack him, couldn't provoke Bellatrix further. Finally, with a shout of effort, Draco cast a blasting curse that shattered her shield. The force of the explosion threw Hermione back again. She landed in a heap, her wand skittering away across the floor. She lay there, gasping for air, the room spinning. Her shoulder burned. Her head swam. Silence fell over the ballroom. Draco walked over to her. He stood over her prone form, his shadow long and dark. He pointed his wand at her face. Hermione looked up. She saw the sweat on his brow. She saw the way his hand was trembling, a tremor so fine only she could see it. "Yield," he whispered. It was a plea. "I yield," Hermione gasped. Draco lowered his wand. He didn't sneer. He didn't gloat. He looked at Bellatrix. "She is finished," he said, his voice flat. "She is bleeding. She is disarmed. Are you satisfied?" Bellatrix walked over, her boots clicking on the floor. She looked at Hermione's bleeding shoulder, then at Draco's impassive face. She seemed disappointed. "No screams," she pouted. "You didn't use the unforgivables, Draco. You are too refined. Your father's flaw." "I defeated her," Draco said, holstering his wand. "I don't need to torture cattle to prove I'm a butcher." It was a dangerous line. Arrogant. Malfoy to the core. Bellatrix stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. Then she threw her head back and laughed. It was a terrible, high-pitched sound that grated on the nerves. "A butcher," she crowed. "Yes, you have the pride at least. Very well, the lesson is over." She waved a hand at Hermione. "Clean her up, then throw her back in the hole. She needs to ruminate on her failure." Draco didn't move to help Hermione. He couldn't. He turned on his heel, his black cloak swirling. "I have a meeting," he said abruptly. "Do not disturb me." He walked out of the ballroom. He didn't look back. He walked with a purposeful stride, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. Hermione lay on the floor, clutching her shoulder. The pain was searing, but her mind was clear. He had hurt her. He had cut her flesh. But he hadn't used Crucio. He hadn't broken her mind. He had aimed for the fleshy part of the shoulder, painful, bloody, but not permanent. He had shielded her from the worst of his aunt's madness by inflicting a calculated, lesser violence. Scabia entered the room to drag her away. As he hauled her up, Hermione's eyes found the spot where Draco had stood. She saw a single drop of water on the polished floor. Not blood, sweat, or a tear. It didn't matter. As she was dragged back to the darkness, Hermione didn't feel betrayed. The cut on her shoulder throbbed in time with her heart, a brutal reminder of the pact they had silently made. "He hurt me to save me," she realized, the truth of it settling deep in her gut. It was a twisted, horrible logic. It was the logic of war. And as the cell door slammed shut, plunging her back into the dark, Hermione touched the warm, wet blood on her shoulder and felt a strange, terrifying surge of hope. He was fighting. In his own cowardly, broken way, he was fighting. And now she had to be strong enough to let him. Up in the West Wing, Draco Malfoy stood over the sink in his bathroom. He scrubbed his hands. The water was scalding hot, turning his skin red, but he couldn't stop. He scrubbed until he felt raw. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. The grey eyes stared back, haunted and wide. "Coward," he whispered to the glass. "Filth." He had cut her. He had watched her blood spill on the floor of his childhood home. And the worst part, the part that made him want to retch, was the relief he had felt when she looked at him with those knowing eyes. She hadn't looked at him with hate. She had looked at him with understanding. She knew what he was. She saw the monster and the boy beneath it. Draco gripped the porcelain sink until it threatened to crack. He was drowning in the grey, but for the first time, he wasn't just drifting. He was swimming towards something. He didn't know if he could save her. He didn't know if he could save himself. But as he stared at the blood that wasn't there on his hands, he made a vow to the silence of the room. Next time, he thought, the steel entering his spine. Next time, I won't be the one holding the wand against her. He turned off the water. The silence returned. But now it was a silence filled with the echo of a cutting curse and the memory of a girl who refused to break. The seesaw had tipped. The warmth was gone. But something stronger, something forged in pain, had taken its place. The Malfoy Manor Library was a cathedral of silence. It was a place where the air hung heavy with the scent of decaying parchment, leather binding, and the bitter residual ozone of dark magic. For Hermione, it was a torture chamber disguised as a sanctuary. She sat at a heavy mahogany desk in the furthest corner, hidden by towering stacks of books on blood magic and lineage curses. Bellatrix had demanded an essay on the purity of intent in the Unforgivables. The parchment in front of Hermione was covered in her neat, cramped handwriting, but her mind was miles away. Her left shoulder throbbed. It had been 3 days since the duel in the ballroom. 3 days since Draco had sliced her skin open with a Diffindo. The wound had been deep, a clean, precise line that ran from her collarbone to the top of her arm. It wasn't life-threatening. She knew anatomy well enough to know he had missed every major artery. But it was stubborn. Dark magic, even when cast with reluctance, left a residue. The cut refused to close completely, weeping a clear, stinging fluid that soaked into the bandages she had scavenged. Hermione shifted in the high-backed chair, and a fresh wave of fire shot down her arm. She hissed, dropping her quill. The feather drifted to the floor, settling in the dust. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the tears that were always threatening to spill. It wasn't the pain. She could handle pain. It was the memory of his face, the way his hand had trembled, the way he had looked at her, pleading with her to yield so he wouldn't have to break her. She reached for her shoulder, her fingers hovering over the stiff fabric of the grey dress. The bandage beneath was damp. She needed to change it, but her supplies were gone. "You're bleeding on the furniture." The voice came from the shadows between the shelves. It was low, tired, and familiar. Hermione didn't jump. She had learned to listen to the house's breathing, and she had heard the soft click of the library door minutes ago. She had known he was there. She had just been waiting for him to speak. Draco stepped into the pool of dim light cast by the floating candles. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. His platinum hair was disheveled, falling into eyes that were rimmed with red. He wore a loose black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the dark mark stark against his pale skin. He didn't try to hide it anymore. It was just a fact, like the color of the walls or the rain against the glass. "It's not bleeding," Hermione lied, keeping her back to him. She bent to pick up her quill, but the movement pulled the wound tight, and she gasped, freezing halfway. Draco made a sound, a sharp intake of breath through his teeth. In 2 strides, he was at the desk. "Don't!" he snapped. He knelt, not in supplication, but to reach the quill before she could. He snatched it from the floor and slammed it onto the table. "Stop moving. You're making it worse." He remained standing close to her chair, looming in her periphery. He smelled of rain and that distinct, sharp scent of brewing ingredients, crushed beetle eyes and ginger. "What do you want, Malfoy?" Hermione asked, her voice tight. She stared at her essay, refusing to look at him. "If you've come to finish the job, your aunt isn't here to applaud." "My aunt," Draco said, his voice dripping with venom, "is currently torturing a goblin in the drawing room. I have no desire to join the audience." He walked around the desk, forcing himself into her line of sight. He leaned against the edge of the table, crossing his arms. The posture was casual, defensive, but his eyes were locked on her shoulder. "Let me see it," he demanded. Hermione stiffened. "No. Granger, it's fine. It's healing. It's not, Draco countered. I can smell the infection from here. Dark magic doesn't heal with time, Granger. It heals with counter-curses, and since you don't have a wand... He trailed off, the implication hanging in the air. You are helpless because of me. Hermione looked up at him then. Her eyes were hard, burning with a mix of pride and exhaustion. Why do you care? You put it there. Draco flinched. It was subtle, a tightening of the jaw, a flicker of the eyelids. But it was there. He looked away, staring at the rows of books as if they held the answers to his damnation. Do you think I wanted to? He whispered. The fight drained out of him, leaving only a raw, jagged honesty. Do you think I enjoy this? Watching you bleed? I think you did what you had to do, Hermione said softly. I did, he agreed, his voice bitter. I cut you to save you. What a noble hero I am. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. If Potter could see me now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small crystal phial. The liquid inside was a vibrant, shimmering yellow. Take off the bandage, he ordered. Hermione looked at the phial. What is it? Murtlap essence mixed with powdered unicorn horn. It neutralizes dark residue. He set it on the table. I brewed it last night. It took me 6 hours. Don't waste it. Hermione stared at the bottle. He had brewed it for her. While she lay in the dark, nursing the wound he gave her, he had been in a dungeon laboratory, bent over a cauldron making the cure. The realization made her chest ache. It was a confusing, twisting pain that had nothing to do with her shoulder. I can't, she admitted quietly. I can't reach the knot. Draco stared at her for a long moment. He looked at her trembling hands, her pale face, the rigidity of her posture. He let out a long sigh, running a hand through his hair. Fine, he muttered. Turn around. Hermione hesitated, then slowly rotated in the chair so her injured shoulder was facing him. She felt the heat of his body as he stepped closer. She held her breath. Draco's hands were cold. When his fingers brushed the nape of her neck to find the knot of the makeshift bandage, she shivered. He paused, his fingers hovering against her skin. Sorry, he murmured. He worked quickly, his touch surprisingly gentle. He untied the knot and peeled the sodden fabric away. The scent of copper and infection wafted up. Draco hissed again. Salazar, he whispered. It's deep. It felt deep, Hermione said dryly, staring at the bookshelves ahead of her. This is going to sting, Draco warned. He uncorked the phial. He didn't pour it. He dipped his fingers into the yellow liquid. He wasn't wearing gloves. He was touching the medicine, and by extension he was about to touch her wound, skin to skin. When his fingers made contact with the raw flesh, Hermione gasped, her back arching off the chair. It burned, a cold, searing fire that felt like ice being pressed into the muscle. She gripped the edge of the desk until her knuckles turned white. Steady, Draco murmured. His voice was right by her ear. Breathe, Granger. Just breathe. He massaged the essence into the cut. His touch was clinical, yet intimate. He traced the line of the wound he'd created, his thumb sweeping over the inflamed skin, pushing the magic out. Hermione let out a shaky breath. The burning was fading, replaced by a numbing cool. She could feel the tension leaving her body, the constant grinding pain finally receding. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Draco didn't stop his work. His fingers were slick with the potion and her blood. Why what? Why are you helping me? You could have just left me to rot. No one would have known. Draco paused. His hand rested on her shoulder, heavy and grounding. He looked down at the scar he was tending. It would never fully fade. She would carry this mark, his mark, forever. Because, he said, his voice rough, I am not them. I try. God, I try to play the part. I wear the mask. I say the words. But I look at you, and I can't. He choked on the words. I can't be the one who breaks you, Hermione. He used her name. The sound of it, spoken in his aristocratic drawl but stripped of all malice, hung in the silent library like a bell note. Hermione turned her head. He was so close. His face was inches from hers. She could see the grey flecks in his eyes, the dark lashes, the way his lips were parted slightly in exertion. For a moment, the war didn't exist. Bellatrix didn't exist. There was only the smell of rain and the warmth of his hand on her shoulder. You didn't break me, she whispered, her eyes searching his. You kept me whole. Draco stared at her, his expression shattering. He looked terrified. He looked like he wanted to kiss her or run away, and he didn't know which impulse was more dangerous. You're a fool, he breathed, but there was no bite in it. You're a Gryffindor fool. You should hate me. You should be plotting to kill me with that quill. I am, Hermione said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. But not today. Draco closed his eyes for a second, as if pained. Then he pulled his hand away. The loss of contact was sudden and cold. He wiped his fingers on a handkerchief from his pocket, the motion jerky and angry. It will scar, he said, stepping back, putting distance between them. I can't fix that. I have other scars, Hermione said, pulling her dress back up to cover the shoulder. It will be in good company. Draco looked at the bandage on the floor, then at the empty phial. Keep it dry. I'll brew more if it gets worse. Thank you, Draco. He froze at the door. He didn't turn around. His shoulders were rigid, the tension back in his frame. Don't thank me, he said, his voice low and haunted. I'm the reason you need it. He walked out, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. Hermione sat alone in the library. She touched her shoulder. The pain was gone, replaced by a tingling warmth. She picked up her quill. She looked at the essay on Unforgivables, Purity of Intent. She dipped the quill in the ink. Draco Malfoy had cast a cutting curse with the intent to save. He had brewed a potion with the intent to heal. She wasn't just an apprentice to a monster anymore. She was an anchor for a drowning boy. And for the first time, Hermione felt a surge of something that wasn't fear and wasn't quite hope. It was loyalty. She began to write, her handwriting stronger now. She wrote about intent. She wrote about how love could be a shield and how mercy could be a weapon. And as the snow began to fall outside the high windows, burying the manor in white, Hermione Granger allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't going to die here after all, because he had come back, and he had used her name. The great hall of Malfoy Manor had been transformed into a crystalline nightmare. It was Yule. In a normal world, this meant warmth, clumsily knitted jumpers, and the smell of treacle tart. Here, it meant ice. Massive, enchanted icicles hung from the ceiling like jagged teeth, dripping a cold mist that clung to the floor. The long tables were laden with silver platters, but the food looked grey and unappetizing under the ghostly light of floating blue candles. Hermione stood by the high table, a mannequin posed for display. Bellatrix had dressed her. Gone were the grey rags and even the simple alterations of the previous weeks. Tonight, Hermione wore emerald green silk, a mockery of her house, a forced assimilation into theirs. The dress was backless, clinging to her like a second skin, the fabric shimmering with a subtle serpentine movement. Her hair had been sleeked back, exposing the sharp line of her jaw and the hollow of her throat. She felt naked. She felt like a trophy. "Stand up straight," Bellatrix whispered, her voice a hiss against Hermione's ear. She dug a sharp fingernail into the soft flesh of Hermione's arm. The Dark Lord may not be here tonight, but his eyes are everywhere. Do not embarrass me, pet." Hermione straightened her spine. She locked her knees to stop them from trembling. She was an occlumency fortress. She was not Hermione Granger, the mudblood. She was a statue, a void. Around her, the elite of the dark world milled about. Masks were off tonight, revealing faces flushed with wine and victory. Dolohov was laughing near the fireplace, his coarse voice grating. The Carrows were feeding each other grapes with a grotesque intimacy, and Draco was there. He stood on the opposite side of the room, near the musicians who were playing a mournful, weeping waltz. He was dressed in formal wizarding robes of acromantulous silk, black on black, severe and sharp. He looked like a prince of the underworld. He hadn't looked at her once. Not when she entered. Not when Bellatrix had paraded her around the room like a prize poodle. He stood with his back to the room, staring into the dark garden through the French doors, a glass of wine untouched in his hand. "He is in a mood," Bellatrix noted, following Hermione's gaze. She chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering. "Perhaps he needs a dance partner. Go to him." Hermione froze. I don't think—" "I didn't ask what you think," Bellatrix snapped. "Go. Show them that you are tamed. Dance with the air. Make it pretty." She shoved Hermione forward. Hermione stumbled, catching her balance in her high heels. The room seemed to tilt. Every eye felt like a physical weight pressing on her skin. She began to walk across the vast expanse of the floor. The click of her heels on the marble was the only sound she could hear over the rushing of blood in her ears. She reached him. The smell of cedar and rain, his smell, hit her before she even touched him, cutting through the cloying scents of perfume and roasted meat. "Malfoy," she whispered. Draco didn't turn. His shoulders were rigid, the muscles of his back visible even through the heavy robes. "Go away, Granger. Don't do this." "She ordered me to," Hermione said, her voice barely audible. "I have to dance with you." Draco turned slowly. When his eyes met hers, the air between them crackled with a sudden, violent tension. He looked at the dress. He looked at the exposed skin of her back. His gaze was not hungry, it was furious. A cold, possessive rage that darkened his grey eyes to the colour of storm clouds. "She dressed you like a snake," he spat, low enough that only she could hear. "I had no choice." "I know." Draco set his glass down on a passing tray with a force that nearly shattered the stem. He stepped closer, invading her space, shielding her from the leering gazes of the other Death Eaters. "If I don't dance with you, Dolohov will ask, and I will have to kill him, and that would be messy." He held out his hand. It was a formal gesture, cold and aristocratic. But when Hermione placed her hand in his, His fingers closed around hers with a desperate, crushing strength. His hand was warm. It was the only warm thing in the entire room. "Breathe," he commanded softly. He pulled her onto the floor. They moved together. It wasn't a waltz. It was a negotiation of gravity. Draco led with a firm, unyielding pressure on her waist. His hand rested on the bare skin of her lower back, his thumb tracing the curve of her spine. The touch burned. It was a brand of ownership that felt terrifyingly like safety. "You look," Draco started, then stopped, his jaw working. He looked over her head, refusing to meet her eyes. "You look like you belong here. It's disturbing." "I don't belong here," Hermione whispered, following his lead, her body reacting to his movements instinctively. "I am a prisoner in a costume." "You are surviving," Draco corrected. He spun her, the green silk of her dress flaring out. "And tonight, you are going to survive this dance." "Look at me." Hermione looked up. "Don't look at them," he murmured, his face inches from hers. "Don't look at my aunt. Don't look at the doors. Look at me. Just me." She did. She locked onto his grey eyes, finding the anchor she needed. The room blurred around them. The laughing Death Eaters, the ice sculptures, the war. It all faded into a grey static. There was only the pressure of his hand on her waist, the heat of his palm against hers, and the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart that she could almost feel through their proximity. "I hate this," she breathed. "I know. I want to go home." Draco's expression fractured. For a second, the mask slipped, revealing a depth of sorrow that stole the breath from her lungs. "I can't give you that, Hermione. Not yet." He had used her name again. In the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by murderers, he had called her Hermione. The music swelled, a crescendo of weeping violins. Draco pulled her closer, eliminating the space between them. For a moment, they weren't dancing. They were clinging to each other, her chest pressed against his, her head tucked under his chin. It was a scandalous embrace, disguised as a dip. "Meet me," he whispered into her hair, his lips brushing her ear. 10 minutes, the astronomy tower. The door is unwarded." He spun her back out, ending the dance with a flourish that left her breathless and dizzy. He bowed, a mockery of chivalry. "Adequate," he announced loudly for the benefit of the room. "But you still step on toes, Granger." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd toward the kitchens. Hermione stood alone in the center of the floor, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt cold without his touch. She felt exposed. She waited. 5 minutes. 7. She grabbed a goblet of pumpkin juice from a tray, pretended to sip, and slowly drifted toward the side exit. The corridors were empty. The shadows were long and deep. Hermione moved quickly, her bare feet silent on the stone stairs. She hiked up the green silk, running now, driven by a need she couldn't name. The astronomy tower was freezing. The wind whipped through the open arches, carrying snow that stung her bare arms. But she didn't care. Draco was there. He was standing by the parapet, looking out over the dark grounds. He had shed his outer robes, standing in his shirt sleeves, oblivious to the cold. When he heard her, he turned. He didn't speak. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't stop until he was looming over her, blocking out the wind, blocking out the night. He reached out and grabbed her face in both hands. His touch was frantic, searching. He ran his thumbs over her cheekbones, her jaw, her temples, as if checking for cracks in the porcelain. "Did they touch you?" he demanded, his voice rough. "Did anyone touch you?" "No," Hermione gasped, her hands clutching his forearms to steady herself. "Just you. Only you." Draco let out a ragged breath, resting his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes. "I wanted to kill them," he whispered. "Every time they looked at you, every time they smiled, I wanted to burn the hall down." "Draco, I can't do this anymore," he confessed, the words tumbling out. "I can't watch you be their pet. I can't watch you disappear." He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. The moonlight washed him in silver, making him look ethereal and broken. "You have to survive," he said intensely. "Do you understand? Whatever she asks, whatever I have to do to you, you have to live. Because if you die here, I will have nothing left to guard." "I'm not going to die," Hermione said. She reached up, her fingers trembling, and touched the side of his face. His skin was cold, his stubble rough against her fingertips. I'm fighting for you." Draco went still. "For me?" "Because you're not one of them," she said fiercely. "You never were. You're just a boy who made a mistake and got trapped in the dark." Draco looked at her, and the conflict in his eyes was a physical thing. The pull between duty and desire, between fear and love. Slowly, inevitably, he lowered his head. He didn't kiss her lips. He kissed the scar on her shoulder, the one he had made, the one he had healed. He pressed his lips to the fabric of the dress, right over the wound, in a gesture of reverence and penitence. Hermione shuddered, a sob catching in her throat. It was more intimate than a kiss. It was an apology woven into a vow. Draco pulled back, his eyes dark. "I have a plan," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "It's madness. It will probably get us both killed, but it's a chance." "Tell me," Hermione said immediately. "Not yet. Not here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. He pressed it into her hand. It was a wand, not hers, not the hawthorn one she had been using. It was clumsy, heavy wood, blackthorn perhaps, a spare from the cellar's collection. "Hide it," Draco commanded. "Strap it to your leg. Sew it into your mattress. Do not use it until I say the word. Do you understand? If Bella finds it, she will kill you slowly." "I understand," Hermione whispered, clutching the wood as if it were a lifeline. "Go back," Draco said, stepping away from her, the loss of his warmth hitting her like a physical blow. "Go back before they miss you. Be the doll. Be the statue. And you?" "I have to go be the heir," Draco said, his lip curling in self-loathing. "I have to go drink to the Dark Lord's health." He looked at her one last time. The wind whipped her hair across her face, sticking to the tears on her cheeks. She looked beautiful and tragic and strong. "Hermione," he said softly. "Yes?" "Happy Christmas." It was absurd. It was heartbreaking. "Happy Christmas, Draco," she choked out. He turned and vanished into the shadows of the stairwell. Hermione stood alone on the tower for a moment, the snow settling on her bare shoulders. She looked down at the wand in her hand. It was cold, dead wood, but to her it felt like the most powerful magic in the world. He had given her a weapon. He had given her a chance. But more than that, he had given her the truth. I will have nothing left to guard. He wasn't guarding the manor. He wasn't guarding his family's legacy. He was guarding her. Hermione tucked the wand into the bodice of her dress, the wood hard against her ribs. She wiped her face, smoothing her expression back into the mask of the obedient apprentice. She walked back to the stairs, her head high. The fear was still there, coiled in her stomach. But the loneliness, the crushing, suffocating isolation of the last few months was gone. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a co-conspirator. The seesaw had tipped. There was no more repulsion. There was only a terrifying, desperate trust and a love that was growing in the dark like a flower in a graveyard, twisted, pale, and impossible to kill. She descended into the light, ready to play her part, waiting for the signal that would burn it all down. The summons came at the hour of the wolf, that grey, breathless span between night and dawn when the world seems to hold its breath. Hermione was not asleep. She was sitting by the narrow slit of a window in the upper guest room she had been moved to since Yule. She was tracing the grain of the blackthorn wand strapped to her thigh beneath the heavy silk of her nightgown. It was a foreign weight, hard and unyielding against her skin, but it pulsed with a faint, steady heat. It was a heartbeat, his heartbeat. The door flew open. There was no knock. There never was. "The library!" the house elf squeaked, trembling so violently its ears flapped. "Mistress calls, now!" Hermione stood. She didn't reach for the robe Draco had left for her. She walked barefoot across the cold floor, the chill seeping into her soles. She felt strangely calm. It was the calm of the eye of the storm. The manor felt different tonight. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, like grasping fingers. The portraits on the walls whispered as she passed, their painted eyes following the girl who walked like a ghost, but held her head like a queen. She reached the library. The double doors were thrown open. Bellatrix was there. She was standing by the fireplace, feeding parchment to the flames. The fire roared green and unnatural, casting sick, dancing shadows across the rows of ancient books. Draco was there too. He was kneeling in the center of the room. Hermione's breath hitched. He wasn't bound, but he might as well have been. His head was bowed, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He looked exhausted, stripped of the arrogance that usually armored him. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing a glimpse of pale skin and the dark ink of the mark. "Enter," Bellatrix commanded, not turning around. She watched the parchment curl and blacken. "Close the door." Hermione obeyed. The heavy thud of the door ceiling felt like the lid of a coffin closing. "I have been thinking," Bellatrix mused, turning slowly. Her eyes were bright, manic, burning with a dangerous intelligence. About affection, about weakness. She began to circle Draco, trailing her wand through his hair. He didn't flinch. He remained stone still, staring at a knot in the floorboards. "My nephew," Bellatrix purred, "has been solicitous. He brings you potions. He dances with you. He looks at you when he thinks I am not watching." She stopped in front of Hermione, her face inches away. "Do you think I am blind, Mudblood? Do you think I do not smell the stench of sentiment?" Hermione's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of cool indifference. "He is merely ensuring your property remains functional, madam." "Is he?" Bellatrix tilted her head. "Then he won't mind this." She pointed her wand at Draco. "Crucio." Draco's back arched. He made a sound, a strangled, guttural gasp that was worse than a scream. His hands clawed at his knees, his knuckles turning white. He shook violently, fighting the curse, fighting the urge to beg. "Stop!" The word tore out of Hermione's throat before she could stop it. Bellatrix lifted the curse instantly. Draco slumped forward, panting, sweat dripping from his nose onto the floor. Bellatrix turned to Hermione, a triumphant smile stretching her lips. "Ah, there it is." She walked over to the desk and picked up the Hawthorn wand, Hermione's practice wand. She held it out. "You have learned the spells," Bellatrix whispered intimately. "You have learned the intent. Now you must learn the sacrifice." She pressed the wand into Hermione's hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Cast it," Bellatrix ordered. "Cast the Cruciatus curse on him. Show me that you are mine. Show me that you care for nothing but the power I have given you." Hermione looked at the wand. Then she looked at Draco. He had raised his head. His face was grey, slick with sweat. His eyes found hers. They were terrified, not for himself, for her. "Do it," his eyes screamed. "Do it, or she kills us both." The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. The magic crackled, waiting for a conduit. Hermione felt the blackthorn wand against her leg, a hidden promise. She could draw it. She could curse Bellatrix. But Bellatrix was faster. Bellatrix was a dueling master. If Hermione drew, they would both be dead before the wand cleared the fabric of her dress. She had to play the game. She had to break the seesaw. Hermione took a step toward Draco. She raised the Hawthorn wand. Her hand was steady. "Draco," she whispered. He looked up at her, baring his throat. It was an offering. "Take it. Hurt me. Survive." Hermione looked into the grey depths of his eyes. She saw the boy who had covered her with a quilt, the boy who had bled for her in the ballroom, the boy who had kissed her scar on the astronomy tower. She felt the anger Bellatrix had told her to cultivate, but it wasn't cold. It was hot. It was a blazing, furious fire, and it wasn't directed at Draco. Hermione lowered the wand. The silence that followed was deafening. "I can't," she said clearly. Bellatrix's face twisted. The mask of the teacher fell away, revealing the monster. "You refuse? You dare to refuse me?" "I can't," Hermione repeated, her voice gaining strength. She turned to Bellatrix. "Because it is a waste." Bellatrix froze. "Explain." Hermione walked closer to Bellatrix, gambling everything on a psychological bluff. She channeled every ounce of disdain Draco had ever shown her, mimicking his sneer, his posture. "You told me that power is about intent," Hermione said smoothly. "You told me that magic knows the truth. To cast Crucio, you have to want to cause pain. You have to enjoy it." She gestured dismissively at Draco, who was watching her with wide, stunned eyes. "I don't enjoy his pain," Hermione lied, her voice cold as the grave. "He is nothing. He's a spoiled boy playing at war. He's beneath the dignity of your magic. He's beneath me." She looked Bellatrix in the eye. "I do not torture insects, madam. I step on them. If you want me to kill him, I will. But do not ask me to give him the satisfaction of my hatred." It was a terrifying performance. It was the darkest thing she had ever done. She had taken the philosophy of the Death Eaters, that love is weakness and indifference is strength, and used it as a shield. Bellatrix stared at her. Her eyes narrowed, searching for the lie. She looked at Hermione's impassive face. She looked at Draco, who looked shattered by the dismissal. Then a slow, terrible smile spread across Bellatrix's face. "Beneath you," she whispered, savouring the words. She laughed, a high, clear sound of delight. Yes, yes, you have the black madness in you after all. To deny him pain because he is not worthy of it? That is delicious. She reached out and stroked Hermione's cheek. You are learning, my little mudblood. You are becoming cold, like iron. Bellatrix turned to Draco. She kicked his boot lightly. Get up, Draco. It seems you have been demoted. Even the prisoner pities you. Draco stood up. He swayed, catching himself on the edge of a table. He didn't look at Bellatrix. He looked at Hermione. His expression was unreadable to his aunt. But to Hermione, who had memorized the map of his micro-expressions, it was screaming. You brilliant, suicidal idiot. Get out! Bellatrix waved a hand, bored now that the tension had broken. Both of you. I have work to do. The Dark Lord moves on Hogwarts soon. We must be ready. She turned back to the fire. Hermione and Draco walked to the door. They didn't touch. They didn't speak. They moved in perfect, silent sync, like two halves of the same soul. They reached the corridor. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, muffling the roar of the green fire. The hallway was empty and dark. Draco grabbed her arm. He didn't pull her close. He dragged her into the shadows of a tapestry, pressing her back against the cold stone wall. He was shaking. The tremors from the Crucio were still racking his body. You didn't do it, he whispered, his voice cracking. You were supposed to do it. I told you, Hermione whispered back, her hands finding the lapels of his torn shirt, holding him up. I'm not fighting their way anymore. I'm fighting my way. She could have killed you. She didn't. She bought it. She thinks I'm a monster. Are you? Draco asked, searching her face in the gloom. Hermione looked at him. She reached up and brushed a strand of sweat-damp hair from his forehead. Her touch was gentle, reverent. I am whatever I need to be, she said softly. As long as you are safe. Draco let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He leaned his forehead against hers. I am not safe, Hermione. I am drowning. Then I will breathe for you, she promised. She took his hand, the one that had held the wand, the one that had brewed the potion, the one that had trembled. She pressed it to her side, right over the hidden blackthorn wand. Draco's eyes widened as he felt the hard wood beneath the silk. You kept it, he breathed. I'm waiting for the signal, she said. You said you have a plan. Draco pulled back slightly. The grey of his eyes hardened into steel. The fear was still there, but it was being pushed back by something stronger. Resolve. I do, he whispered. Potter is on the move. There are rumours. He's hunting for something. When he comes, and he will come, Granger, he has a hero complex almost as big as yours. The manor will fall into chaos. He squeezed her hand. When the first spell hits the wards, Draco vowed, I am coming for you. Not as a Death Eater, not as a Malfoy. As what? Hermione asked. Draco looked at her. The tension that had defined them, the enemies, the rivals, the prisoner and the jailer, finally snapped, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth. As yours, he said. He didn't kiss her. It was too dangerous. The portraits were watching. The shadows had ears. Instead, he brought her hand to his lips and breathed against her knuckles. It was a pact sealed in the dark. Go to your room, he ordered softly, stepping back, the mask of indifference sliding back into place, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Lock the door. Sharpen your wand. Draco, she whispered. He paused in the shadows. Don't die, she said. I can't, he replied, his voice drifting back to her as he melted into the darkness. I have a promise to keep. Hermione stood alone in the hallway. The castle was silent around her, a tomb of dark magic and ancient blood. But for the first time, the silence didn't frighten her. She touched the spot where his breath lingered on her hand. She felt the wand on her thigh. She felt the scar on her shoulder. She wasn't Bellatrix's student anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was Hermione Granger, and she was in love with the boy who lived in the dark. She turned and walked toward her room, her footsteps echoing on the stone. Outside, the wind howled, battering the manor walls. But inside, the candle had been lit. The slow burn had caught fire, and when the time came, they would burn it all down together. Here is the epilogue. It is designed to offer a sense of healing and peace while acknowledging the scars that brought them there. Epilogue. The art of kintsugi. The light in Provence was different. It didn't demand, it invited. It spilled across the wooden floorboards of the small farmhouse like spilled honey, warm and slow. Hermione sat on the edge of the bed, a mug of coffee warming her hands. She was watching him sleep. For months after the war ended, after the trials and the screaming headlines and the funerals, Draco hadn't slept. He had kept watch. He would sit in a chair by the door, wand in hand, waiting for a threat that had already been defeated. It had taken a year of silence, of sun, and of her steady breathing beside him to coax him back to a place where he could close his eyes and simply drift. Now he looked younger. The sharp lines of tension around his mouth had softened. The grey of his skin had been replaced by a faint golden tan from hours spent in the vineyard rows, working the earth with his hands, restoring something living instead of destroying it. Hermione shifted, the movement causing the sheet to slip from her shoulder. There, pale and silvery against her skin, was the scar, the line where his diffindo had cut her. It was no longer angry. It didn't weep. It was just a mark of history, a jagged line of silver ink on a page of flesh. A hand reached out, warm and calloused, and fingers brushed against the scar. Hermione didn't flinch. She leaned into the touch. Draco's eyes were open. They were clear, the storm clouds finally cleared to reveal a calm slate sea. "You're staring," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. It was the same voice that had once ordered her to entertain him, but the command was gone. Now it was just an observation. "I'm studying," Hermione corrected softly. "I'm memorizing the piece." Draco smiled, a rare, genuine expression that still felt like a secret gift. He sat up, the sheet pooling at his waist. He looked at the scar on her shoulder, his thumb tracing the ridge of it with a reverence that made her breath hitch. "I hated myself for this," he whispered, his eyes dark with the memory of the manor ballroom. "For a long time, every time I looked at it, I saw my aunt's face. I saw the blood." "And now?" Hermione asked. Draco met her gaze. He didn't look away. He didn't build walls. "Now," he said softly, "I see the moment you didn't break. I see the moment I chose you." He leaned forward and pressed a kiss to the scar. It wasn't an apology anymore. It was a benediction. Hermione set her coffee down and reached for him. Her fingers tangled in his hair, longer now, free of the severe styling of his youth. She pulled him close until their foreheads rested against each other, sharing the same air. She called me her student, Hermione whispered. She thought she was teaching me how to hate. She was a fool, Draco breathed against her skin. She taught you how to endure, and you taught me. He paused, searching for the word, his grey eyes vulnerable. You taught me that the dark isn't empty. You taught me how to breathe underwater. Outside, the cicadas began their morning song, and the scent of lavender drifted through the open window, replacing the phantom smells of dust and dark magic. They weren't fixed. They were like kintsugi pottery, broken pieces put back together with gold, the cracks visible but beautiful, stronger for having been shattered. Draco pulled back slightly, his hand cupping her face. "Breakfast?" he asked, the mundane question feeling miraculous in its simplicity. "Or shall we stay here and let the world wait?" Hermione smiled, a true bright thing that reached her eyes. She kissed him, slow, deep, and filled with a terrifying amount of love. "Let it wait," she said. "We have time." And for the first time in their lives, they did. The hourglass had shattered, the war was over, and the boy and the girl who had found each other in the dark were finally, completely walking in the light.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for listening to this story. Writing Bellatrix Student was an emotional journey for me. I wanted to ask a hard question. Can love grow in a place full of hate? For me, this story is not about darkness, it is about the light. It is about two people who are enemies, but who become the only safe place for each other. Draco makes a terrible choice. He hurts Hermione to save her life. It is not normal romance. It is painful, but it is also very real. I wanted to show that they are both broken, but their broken pieces fit together perfectly. I hope this story made you feel something. I hope it showed you that even in the darkest night, you can find a little bit of light. Thank you for being here with me. I suggest we don't say goodbye just yet, but listen to one more story on my channel.